Hello and welcome to the third installment of this podcast prepared by Profweb and Salties. I'm Ryan, an editor from Profweb.ca, and I'm joined by Kevin, a physics teacher from Vanier College, who is also a member of the Salties Active Teaching and Learning Community of Practice. Today, we're joined by Jason Lapointe from John Abbott College. We will be hearing from him about his transition to an alternative teaching approach and how he prepared his final evaluations for off-site delivery of the exams. So I was wondering, Jason, would you please introduce yourself, your department, and the courses which you're teaching?
Great, yeah. So my name is Jason Lapointe, and I work at John Abbott College. I'm currently in the biology department, and I'm teaching anatomy and physiology for the first-year nurses. Yeah. So when quarantine began, we were finishing our second anatomy and physiology course. With our nursing student cohort. Yeah.
Can you describe how the physical closure of the colleges impacted your teaching approach?
So the funny thing about the biology department is that we are mostly concerned with our ability to connect with our students. Like generally, we have a high traffic department, and so we spend a lot of time like talking, seeing students. We do offer a lot of extracurricular stuff. And so I think our main concern was just not being able to check in on students, and that was a major concern because we know that moving online, we're going to see fewer of our students, but also we wouldn't have the ability to check in as we normally would. The transition to online learning has been pretty difficult for a lot of our students, and generally from an online perspective or just essentially teaching students from my computer, one of the only ways that I have to assess whether or not they're doing well is whether or not they're maintaining their grades, right? Whereas when we're on campus, I know if they're there or not. I know if they're answering questions. I know if they're paying attention. I know if they're engaged, and I don't necessarily have that anymore. So it's been a lot more difficult to assess whether or not my students are taking this transition well or not. The other thing is everything's online, right? So our assessments, we assumed they were going to be open book, right? And so transitioning from no open book to open book in the middle of the semester was pretty difficult. So we had a lot of discussions about how to make that transition. And one of the things that we talked about was increasing the difficulty of our questions, changing or possibly changing the format, increasing the level of Bloom's taxonomy of some of our questions. And a lot of that was met with a lot of mixed feelings, mostly because we'd set out at the beginning of the year to test students in a certain way, and then to pivot by changing the level of difficulty or changing the question format or exam format. It just it felt really weird. So those are some of the major changes that we've had to deal with, and those are some of the concerns that we've been talking about a lot. So yeah.
The approach that you ultimately adopted, was it recommended by the department or your colleagues or the college, or was it something you sort of had to establish on your own?
So I've been in the biology department for 3 years, and prior to that, I'd been working in South Korea, and I was at a high school just before making the transition to John Abbott. And at that high school, they were using Google Classroom, so they were really into Google products. And one of the reasons why high schools are into those products is because they're free. So I was really happy with my transition from that school to John Abbott because our IT and our college admin was very supportive of alternative or just different learning management systems. So for me, since the beginning, I've been using Google Classroom. So it wasn't so much, it wasn't a choice that I'd made going into quarantine. I was already using it. But the bulk of the support that the college provides teachers is going towards Moodle and Teams. So we're a very small group of teachers that are using Google Classroom, and generally we either work on our own or we ask each other some questions if we have them. But otherwise, it's Yeah, so there's no direct support from IT, although I could ask them questions if I'd like. Although the bulk of the attention goes towards Moodle and Teams.
Can you tell us more specifically about some of the considerations that were going through your mind as you were searching for a solution for final assessments? Was academic honesty high on your list?
It was. One of the biggest things was kind of, I guess, normalizing the situation for a lot of our students. Our campus was very concerned about standardizing the different types of learning management systems that we're using across, the different departments. It was really important for them to make sure that, we were all using one type of communicating device or communicating software with the students so that they don't have to hop around a lot. And to be honest, like I felt a little bit guilty about using Classroom because it's not so common an LMS around the college, right? But given that I'd already started using it, and a lot of my lecture notes, a lot of my worksheets, everything is on either Google Docs, Google Sheets, Google Slides. It was hard for me to pivot and start using Moodle. In terms of academic honesty, the nursing program, they're very firm about academic honesty, and generally we've had a lot of I've had a lot of discussions with the nursing coordinator, and generally that's something that's very high on their priority list, especially in the first semester or regarding first semester students in the nursing program. And so for us, it was really important to maintain that, and it was really difficult to go about it a way to maintain that, especially with online assessments. That's where we came up with, writing multiple versions of exams. Like a lot of teachers know that that requires a lot of work. Coming up with like honesty pledges, honesty contracts with the students, like those are all just really nice ideas. But the nursing cohort, they're very tight. They're very close knit, right? They move from one class to the next. They have similar biology classes. They have all their nursing classes together. And generally, because those two courses take up the bulk of their time in their weekly schedule, they're forced to take very similar gen ed classes. So they're always together, right? And that they form a lot of really strong bonds, and they have a really strong tendency to work together. So as teachers in the nursing department, we almost assume they're looking at their books, they're looking at their notes, but they're also talking to each other during exams. So that's been something that we've had difficulty addressing, especially right in the middle of a semester and having difficulty pivot to new styles of assessments or new assessment formats. So going forward in the fall, I think we're probably going to consider some new things or bring them up at the very least.
So you decided to use Google Quiz for your assessments. Can you tell us about some of the advantages of using this tool?
Yeah, so as everybody or a lot of people know, Google Forms can be changed into a Google Quiz, right? So if I use Google Form or Google Quiz, I use those things interchangeably. It's just it's got a very simple interface. I love the idea of being able to manipulate every aspect of the quiz. What I work on as a teacher looks very similar to the final product. It allows me to view the exam very easily from the student's perspective, so I know exactly when an exam is turned on or off, and then I can make adjustments to the settings. And I think just the ease with which I can transfer questions into a Google Quiz, I think is quite easy. I can easily make different sections that act like different pages of the exam. But also I think a really, really important feature for me was the way that I distribute the exam. Now, because I use it with Google Classroom, I can provide my students with a link to the exam the night before. Right. So for example, if I had a final exam this morning, I sent the link for the final exam the previous evening. And so the students know where to look at the time of the exam. I think they can access the link. I think it makes them a lot more comfortable, right? So they don't have to freak out about being in the right place or not. And then as a teacher, I can manipulate whether or not they get to see the questions. So we've had a tendency during assessments to meet on Teams. I'll take attendance, I'll say hi, I'll go over academic integrity, what that means. And then generally what I'll do is I'll manually open the exams, and then the students can just start the exam as soon as I let them.
Great. And I imagine that would be by turning on the form at the exact moment that you want them to take the exam.
That's it. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. There's been a few hiccups, to be honest, and not a lot. There have been instances where students have lost their answers. But to be honest, with the move to online education, online learning, I've just had to ease up on just these types of situations, right? These events, just being a lot more generous about extra time and just being aware that it's out of the student's capacity or control when they accidentally close a browser, right? And they lose all their answers. So I think as teachers, I think we've just had to ease up on these types of issues.
Yeah, it's a big transition for them, and they need a little bit of patience, just like us as teachers and educators need patience as well towards us. Yeah.
It often feels like we're on the defensive because we're like, sometimes we feel like students are trying to trick us, and I feel like that's a very it's a really hard feeling to shake. But I think under these circumstances, I think it's really important to give all the students the benefit of the doubt. And when things screw up, there are accidents, I think just being generous with the extra time, I think that's been really helpful with easing a lot of their anxiety as well, because they get really, really nervous because a lot of people have connectivity issues. So I think just being super supportive and understanding of these types of situations has really helped myself, like my own anxiety, my own stress about making sure tests go really, really well. And also it's made students a lot less stressed out if they know that, teachers are a lot more understanding about the types of issues that they're likely to encounter online.
How did your pilot of the tool work out? Are you satisfied with the results?
Yeah, I think just being aware of a lot of the pitfalls, a lot of the issues that might crop up using Classroom. Like I told you that some of my students have lost their answers, and I'm starting to understand exactly how they lost all their answers. I think that's going to be a major issue, but also I'm quite satisfied with the use of this online tool, with the use of Google Quiz to make summative evaluation. So I do see myself using it again next semester, especially with Google Classroom. I think it pairs very well. But for a lot of teachers who aren't using Classroom, I think it's still a valid option. I think a lot of the things that I talked about, you can still do, right? There's a lot of things that are maybe a little bit more difficult without Classroom, but still possible.
Do you have any adjustments that you foresee for the next round of assessments, Jason?
Yeah, so again, with our move to online learning, we discussed a little bit about how to address the open book nature of our future assessments, right? And it's really difficult to pivot on assessment format or question format in the middle of a semester. So our students, at the end of their 3-year program, take a licensing exam. And a huge bulk of this licensing exam is multiple choice questions. So the nursing department wants us to address and wants us to help their students practice taking multiple choice questions. The thing is that with online learning, one of the best ways to ensure individuals attain or acquire certain competencies is through more individualized answers, right? So like long answer questions are much more suitable to maybe online learning, mostly because their answers have to be individualized. Things like a multiple choice question can be done with a friend, and if 2 people are working together, it's hard to discern whether or not they've done it apart, right? So I think moving forward, that would be a really good thing to pursue, right? And in order to pursue long answer questions on a final exam, I think we have to start very early in the semester with training them how to answer these questions and how to formulate their response in such a way that it makes sense, it's organized, it's cohesive, that sort of thing. So I think moving forward, we're gonna have a lot of decisions to make over the summer as to how we want to change our assessments moving forward. And if the plan is to go more towards essay-based questions on the final exam, we have to introduce a lot more of those throughout the semester. So that's one of the ways that we're thinking about making some changes.
Do you have any other advice to teachers as they finish up the winter 2020 semester and begin planning for the fall 2020 semester?
Yeah, so I've been thinking about that a lot, like what my job as a teacher is going to be over the summer and how to just make online learning for me personally much more enjoyable, because as long as the teacher is quite enthusiastic about what they're teaching, I feel like it's much more enjoyable for the students. So my concern personally has been just with identifying my own teaching values, right? And one of the things that I value a lot is just my interaction with students and seeing them discuss things, hearing them talk, talking about the material. So I think moving forward, and what I'm going to try to do during the summer, is how to encourage an environment that would address my own teaching values. So I want to see more students discussing in class. I want to hear their voices. I want to spend less time providing lectures synchronously, because over the semester I went from synchronous lecture styles to asynchronous lecture styles during the quarantine. And I felt like the bulk of my frustration and dissatisfaction with teaching online was through synchronous lecturing. And when I made the pivot to asynchronous lecturing, where I would record lectures beforehand, provide them to students before we attend class, I was able to use my class time a little bit in ways that I wasn't doing so before. And I'd like to pursue those things because I feel like it's much more enjoyable for myself. But also moving forward, I think more group work, setting up channels. I think a lot of the physics teachers in John Abbott are already doing group work, using channels to form groups and jumping into groups and then jumping out of groups. And then I want to do more of that. I think getting the students a lot more active is going to be my main concern over the summer. So if I had any advice, I think just if there are teachers struggling with this transition to online learning and they're dissatisfied or they're frustrated with it, I think just reevaluating our values and trying to pivot in such a way that a lot of those values can still be addressed in an online format, I think would be great.
So I would like to say thank you to Jason for joining us today and giving us some inspiration to consider our own evaluation approaches. For our viewers, please feel free to add some of your stories about the transition to alternative teaching in the comments area below. Thank you.
Great, thanks for having me.